Welcome to the Reduce Cyber Risk Podcast, where we provide you the training and tools you need for your cybersecurity career. Hi, my name is Shon Gerber, and I'm your host for this action-packed, informative podcast. Join me each week as I provide you the information you need to grow your cybersecurity knowledge while taking practical and actionable steps to protect your business from the evil hacker horde. All right, let's get going. Welcome to the Reduce Cyber Risk Podcast. We are now February 4th, 2019, and we've got some great stuff heading into this new year that's going to be happening. And as it relates to reduce cyber risk, our ultimate goal is to teach you around cybersecurity training made simple. That's the ultimate goal of what we provide. The cool part about this is if you are a cybersecurity professional looking for opportunities to learn, Reduce Cyber Risk is the place for you. If you're a business owner trying to understand this cybersecurity convoluted mess, so Reduce Cyber Risk is for you. So we're going to get into it. Today's podcast, we've got a lot of good stuff coming on to you. And in today's podcast, we have in the cybersecurity news, NERC, N-E-R-C, the November Echo Romeo Charlie, fines utilities $10 million. Execs remain weak link in cybersecurity chain. 250 Webstresers users face legal action. And from a security training standpoint, we're going to be getting into understanding Cybersecurity Frameworks Part 2, okay? And the goal of all this with Reduce Cyber Risk and the podcast and the video training that we put out is to help cybersecurity professionals and businesses to understand cybersecurity as general. And the goal is to make it easy for you to understand the key nuances around it. So that's kind of the purpose around the podcast and the video trainings. Now, NERC fines. The first item of business around news is NERC fines utilities $10 million. And this is from Elizabeth Montalbano, and I probably just totally butchered her name, but you can find her at securityledger.com. And I also have the links and all the show notes as well that you'll have available to you at reducecyberrisk.com. Well, I've been screwed up. I basically screw up a lot. But in this case, I really goofed up on what NERC actually stands for. NERC, November Echo Romeo Charlie, stands for the North American Electric Reliability Corp. Yeah, I've just totally butchered that on previous podcasts, and I've been butchering it over the years. Basically thought it had to deal with the Nuclear Energy Regulatory Commission. Yeah, that was a different NERC. So anyway, I got that wrong. But with the North American Electric Reliability Corp, they find, or basically they're the regulating aspect when it comes to critical infrastructure. And there's critical infrastructure protection, cybersecurity regs that they are holding people accountable to. And they fined $10 million to a group of basically power plants and energy companies around not doing good enough or not doing well enough in the cybersecurity space. So now if you're a security professional, I'm sorry, I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so if it seems like I'm a little goofy on that regard, that's the reason. It seems in that when it comes to cybersecurity and you're a security professional, whether you're working for the CISSP or you're a security analyst or whatever that might be, this information is extremely valuable in the fact that you need to understand how do these regs and how do they affect you, because you may be in an industry now or in the future where these regs could be a big factor to you. So the critical infrastructure protection regs are out there and they have to comply with these regs. Well, what they came to find out was that there's 127 violations of CISSP, the Critical Infrastructure Protection. And of that, they created a 250-page document to annotate and to detail out what were the issues involved. They had 13 findings that they considered of serious risk to the operation of bulk energy power. So obviously, if there's 13 things like that, that's not good, right, from a serious risk standpoint. They also found out 62 were of a moderate, which basically weren't as bad as the 13 that were considered serious risk. Now, altogether, this is really kind of bad news for the power grid in the fact that we know that other outside entities have been targeting the U.S. and their power grid for many, many years now. And working in a previous life, know full well that the power grids in the past, I'm sure they're better now, were not that well protected. And they really didn't need to be. And what had happened in many cases is that you'd have a power grid setup that was never designed for cyber, and then somebody would put a web front end on the front end of these power plants to allow for remote access. Well, that can cause some problems, right? It's come a long way since the first time I'd ever gotten into this from a previous life in the military. However, you can only imagine that this is going to continue to be a challenge, right? So the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, called out these hacks basically from the Russians and hitting the power grid and said, we have to take better precautions. We have to basically put this as a priority, as a national priority. And he called out the Ukraine hacks that happened in 2015 and 2016, where the Russians actually went out and attacked the power grid of Ukraine, causing massive, not casualties, but just chaos, right? It just causes, if you start losing power, basically people are just wanting to go, well, how do I deal with this? And what do I do? And so if you want to have something that demoralizes people, that's a great way of doing it. Not to say you should do it, but that's psychological operations 101. The findings were this, is that the failure to implement and document access controls was a big leading issue with the 13 issues that they had. So as a security professional, one, do you document your access controls to your different to your area? Two, do you have those document controls in place at this time? And again, they also talked about all electronic access points. What are some other access points that are out there where people could have access to? So again, this comes down to thoroughly understanding your environment. So as far as compliance goes, CISSP, the Critical Infrastructure Protection piece, they find these companies, and the companies then said that they would revisit their corporate IT compliance program. And they referenced back to the 2017 hacks that had happened, where the FBI and the DOJ had recommended through a report they had that there was multiple third parties. Basically, the Russians were getting in through third parties. Now, as a security professional, you know third parties are one of your biggest risks, and so this is no different in the critical infrastructure space. And so, therefore, if you've got a business, those are one of the things you need to be focused on: is who are your third parties and how do they have access into your environment. They also increased use of IoT is concerning them, and it's possibly causing issues. It's an increasing risk. Again, back if you have a business or you are a security professional that's maintaining the security for your business, the IoT is a significant risk to your organization. So it's important that you architect it correctly, especially going forward. The next one is execs remain the weak link in the cybersecurity chain. Now, Casey Zerkis at LinkedIn, you got her links will be there in the show notes as well. The bunker reports that execs are part of the problem. Okay, so I've been in cybersecurity for many years now, and I can tell you that executives are part of the problem. Also, individuals that work on the shop floor are part of the problem. Everybody is part of the problem. But what it comes right down to is the executives are an easy target as it relates to cybersecurity hackers and people trying to take advantage of them from a social engineering standpoint. So you need to educate these executives on what to do. Now, you have to hope that you have an executive that will help you. They have the most influence within their organization, and so therefore it's important that you become a partner with them. Now, in this link, it talked about how these individual hackers were targeting social media. They would target different pieces around them, trying to get their financial information and trying to become man in the middle, talking about the whole, you need to wire money to this location. So that's out there, right? Well, the other thing to consider around that is that from a previous life, I would also target their spouses and their kids and other things like that. Now, the point of it is if you can start messing with somebody's mind from a psychological standpoint and you go, well, I know where your children are at, or I know where your wife is at, and I know all these things, that is bad juju, right? That's not good. So therefore, it's imperative that if you are an executive, be very careful about what you post online. Be very careful what your spouse posts online. He or she, doesn't matter. The point of it is that if you are an executive, people are looking at you. They consider you as a potential prime target. You're usually highly compensated individuals. You also have influence within an area or environment. So therefore, you're kind of a prime target. So therefore, it's just important that whatever you do is make sure that you keep that stuff in mind. Now, if you're the security professional, it's also important that what you do is you educate your senior executives on how to best protect themselves and potentially their families as well while they're online. Now, they said the executives have apathy, and they say it's not my problem, it's IT's problem. Well, this happens not just with executives, but it happens with everybody. So it's imperative as a security professional, you work to to make changes in that. You work to bridge that gap. The last thing is you educate, educate, educate. You cannot help but do this. You have to do more and more of this. And you need to build the relationships we talked about and provide use cases on how these things could affect them and potentially their families and the business itself. You also can't live your life like there's a boogeyman around every corner. It's just being smart and living smart and ensuring that everybody is educated and has all the information they need to best protect themselves and the company. The next one, 250 Webstresers users face legal action. This is from Brian Krebs at Krebs on Security. And you can, he's got a really good blog post out there, always does. Guy's amazing. But basically it comes down to this, is that there was an online attack for hire site. And there was about 250 customers that were taking advantage of this site. They would then go out and they would hire somebody to attack another site, whether it's an individual site or it's a corporation. Well, it got busted, right? And it happened in the Netherlands. I think it's in the EU is where it happened. And in Europol, which is basically like the US's FBI, they're one of the largest law enforcement agencies in Europe. They teamed up with the FBI and UK, and they went in and they took down this site. And this was in April of 2018. At the time, it had about 151,000 registered users that were part of this site. So that's 150,000 people that are wanting to take after somebody. Now, does that mean these people were registered and actually launching attacks? No. Does that mean that they were just kind of maybe doing looky-loos? Possibly. But there were 151 registered users. Well, law enforcement is going after all of them, right? Whoever paid for an attack, they're going after. So it's something to be considering is that if you are a hacker or if you're a wannabe hacker, be careful who you associate with. Simple fact of it is if you're just trying to poke around and maybe you try to do something fun just to kind of, go attack your buddy or your brother just in a joking way, well, it could have ramifications. That there's a crime and they will come after you. Well, as a security professional, it's imperative that you understand this stuff because you know what? Your network, sometimes people within your environment could be utilizing your network to do these things. So, and some cases it can be unwittingly. Now, December, 3 men were charged with booter sites. Now, I had no idea what a booter site was. I was like, what does that term mean? But as I read on what it exactly talks about, well, then it made more sense, right? What it's using is it's using IoT devices to do denial of service attacks. And it comes down to is that if you have cameras, now there's more prolific cameras and video recorders that are out there that are connected to the internet. Why? Well, look at Nest. Not Nest, that's not the right word, but Simply Safe or any of these other home security systems that are all connected via your Wi-Fi. Well, if they have vulnerabilities in them, what ends up happening is people will take advantage of that and then they stream the data to the targeted audience, so the targeted individual. And they basically deny of service attacks, DOS attack on that individual or that site or that business. Because these video cameras produce so much data, it ends up just taking these sites down. So it's imperative that you have your stuff configured correctly. But at the end of the day, that's what a booter is. They're just they knock down websites. Well, and so therefore these guys are going to be charged with it. They're going to probably spend some jail time breaking big rocks into little rocks, and not a good thing, right? Now, there's some other ones that have hit recently. There was a Connecticut man that had 10 years for a DOS attack on a hospital. He's getting 10 years in jail for doing something with a computer on a hospital. Now, understand why, right? People's lives are at risk, but this is so simple that he did a DOS attack on somebody and is going to get 10 years for it. That's just not really, it's crazy. It's just absolutely crazy. There's also a 20-year-old who gets basically 2 years for utilizing the titanium stressor. And what happened with the titanium stressor is that he would launch attacks on people, and people would buy this capability with a titanium stressor, and he made over $300,000 of income utilizing this tool. Now, again, I talked about this before. There's lots of money to be made in being a hacker, right? There's some definite pros, but the cons, man, the cons are a little bit steep unless you don't mind going to jail. 2 years or 10 years, you name it, right? So bottom line is don't do it. Just don't do it. And don't be playing with it, because what happens is some of these people that utilize these tools are, like I mentioned before, just kind of poking around it a little bit, just kind of playing around, seeing, hey, is that something that we really want to do or not do? I don't know. That's not a good choice. Okay. Now, the Netherlands, they were actually giving out a get out of free jail card for individuals who was their quote-unquote first offense. So first-time offenders, and this is a quote from them, skills in coding, gaming, computer programming, cybersecurity, and anything IT-related are in high demand, and therefore are many careers and opportunities available to use these wisely. So back when I was a hacker for the government, doing it all legal, we always used to have the comment, use your powers for good, not for evil. Well, these people decided to use their powers for a little bit of evil just to see what it would be like. Bad idea. Now, in the Netherlands, hey, I guess it's okay. You are able to obtain a get out of jail free card. But most of the other countries, probably not so much the case. So you have to decide, is it worth it or not worth it? So if you're a cybersecurity person, make sure that a professional, make sure you educate your people again, and you get smart on these things because it's imperative. People are going to be looking to you as the expert, as the resource within your environment that needs to know this stuff. Okay, so here are some of the references around that I just talked about in the security news, and you can check all these out. Again, they'll be in the show notes as well. All right, let's roll on to our training. All right, this is part 2 of understanding cybersecurity frameworks, and this is part of the CISSP supplement that we add as part of our broadcast/podcasts that occur on a weekly basis, along with individual training that I provide through Reduce Cyber Risk. All right, let's get started. So as we're looking at a case study, this is called the Cybersecurity Framework, and we had talked about in part 1 around PCI-DSS and the aspects that how it works within the governance and compliance piece of that. Well, so now we're going to pull up a framework that came out back in April of 2018, and it's called the Cybersecurity Framework. And what it's designed to do is it's a voluntary framework with potentially with standards, guidelines, and best practices on what you should do to protect your environment. Now, it's designed specifically to manage your cybersecurity risk in a cost-effective manner. And it was put together in a way that originally it came from the Critical Infrastructure Framework that is used within the Nuclear Energy Regulation Compliance. No, it's actually NERC, is Nuclear Energy Regulatory Commission. I think that's what it is. But it came from the Critical Infrastructure Framework. And so they morphed it, made some changes to it, and they called it the Cybersecurity Framework. And this comes from NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology. It was published in 2018, in April of 2018, and it's really designed around the security framework or around the critical infrastructure. However, it works really well with different types of security mechanisms, and it's a really good product to help a business that is going to be implementing some level of security framework within their organization. The part I like about it is because it's very simple. It gets right to the point. It's not complicated, and it makes a lot of sense. However, if you don't understand, if you haven't really done with the framework before, it can look a little daunting, a little challenging. However, there's a lot of really good information out there on that. At Reduce Cyber Risk, we're actually going to go over some frameworks here in the future and how you can actually fill those out and work best for you, step by step, and what are some key aspects you need to be aware of as you fill one out. It is version 1.1, but version 1.0 is still viable, and but they've made some slight changes to it that took it to the next version. Now, the background around this is that Executive Order 13636, okay, came into being, and that was about basically improving the critical infrastructure of cybersecurity. And the purpose of it was that they knew that they had issues. There's electrical grids have been hacked. There's other areas of that water supplies that have been hacked, and so they thought they needed to put some level of standardization around these environments, and hence that's the reason for the cybersecurity framework. The cool part about all this, though, is that anybody can use it and they can implement it within their organization, and it's not real hard to do. And what it started off was a collaboration between industry and government on what the best way to secure their environment, from identity to detecting to mitigating these risks and so forth. And it created a set of standards, guidelines, and practices basically to promote the protection of critical infrastructure. But in reality, you can use it anywhere. It doesn't have to be just specifically an electrical power grid or on a water treatment facility. So what it can do for you. Now, what it does is it provides clarity. Okay, that's what it can do, and direction around what may seem very daunting and confusing, honestly. So it provides that for you. And it can reduce the premiums associated with cyber insurance. Now, I've looked at different cyber insurance policies. One of the big aspects that comes into this is having a framework in place. I think it's Ohio came up with a part of a cybersecurity legislation that basically states that if you follow a cybersecurity law or a framework of some kind, then what ends up happening is the ability for someone to sue you is dramatically reduced. And I think they called it a safe harbor, but bottom line is they're saying that if you do follow a framework, you implement practices in place to protect yourself, they can't sue you from a civil standpoint. Now, whether or not that actually happens or not, it's hard to say, but at the end of the day, it can reduce your risk as it relates to your litigation situation. But it also, in the case of a cybersecurity insurance, they will ask you, do you follow some level of a framework for your company and for your business? And so therefore, they're looking to ways to reduce their risk. They know that if you're following a framework and you have it documented and you have people that are working on it, odds are strong that you've been paying attention, and therefore you will put practices in place to limit the risk to your organization. So again, these can reduce the premiums associated with cyber insurance. Again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm an insurance agent, but we have seen it in the past, and I've dealt with it individually that it can happen. So something to consider. It can be a factor in a civil lawsuit. Again, I come back to the fact I'm not a lawyer, okay? But having a solid security program in place has been noted, and we talked about this just recently with Ohio, but it's been noted that if you have this when it comes to data breach, you are in a much better position. We talked about earlier Massachusetts and their security laws that are in place, their data breach notification laws. And a part of this is that you have a documented security program. Well, if you have a framework in place, then that will help you with your security program. And it'll allow you to have it be documented as well. So there's a lot of good positives around this as what it can do for you. Now, what it cannot do for you, it's not a checklist on what to implement. Now, it may seem a little bit prescriptive as we look at this here in the future. It may come across like, well, if I just do this check, if I do this check, but you're going to have to take a risk-based approach on what you put into place and what you don't put into place. And it can't just be a checklist, because what's going to happen is you're going to do that. You're going to put this checklist in place, but you don't put any controls around it. And if something bad happens, well, they're going to come after you. So it's not just, I'm going to go check these boxes and then move on. It is something you're going to have to follow through with. Now, it's not all-encompassing, right, with all regulations. Some of these regulations are still changing, and it will not meet all of the regulations around it. So as an example, HITRUST has different regulations than ISO 27001 certifications do. They're not the same. One's in the health industry, one is not necessarily the health industry. Now, could you use one as more of a broad brush? You could. However, you may actually end up adding a lot of extra waste because you have to put all these things in place. So it's just something to consider. Do you really need it? But know that if you're using the cybersecurity framework, it will get you in a good spot that will meet a majority of these other frameworks as well, the HITRUSTs, the ISO 27001, and so forth. It'll go a long ways to put you in a good position. Now, it's not an easy button that you just mash and you move on. So I hit this button, I'm good to go now that I have a framework in place. No, you actually have to do the hard work and the heavy lifting and put something in place on paper and document it. So again, it's just not this easy button that hey, I've got this piece of paper. Aha, I'm protected. It's like a bulletproof jacket or something. No, it's not. It'll go right through. The bullet will go right through. So you need to make sure that you do have something in place there. Now, it will provide you guidance without IT, and what it basically means is that you can look through it and go, okay, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I did that. But the problem is if you don't have IT support on this, you could be setting yourself up. And so that the point of that is that IT, as your subject matter experts, need to be involved with you. They need to know what you're putting in place, why you're putting in place, and what you're going to do to make sure it's mitigated. Now, they may do the mitigation pieces for you, but at the end of it, they're the ones that have to be involved with you as far as it's being orchestrated and put within your environment. It's also not a liability shield, not by any stretch of the imagination. We've talked about this in the past, but it will help reduce your risk around liability, but it's not like, okay, I did it. I knew can't touch me. No, that's not the truth. It can touch you big time, but it's just something to prove that in the event something bad does happen, you have gone through the steps you needed to best protect your information, your customer's information, and potentially, depending upon where it's at, your company's information. So you really need to just make sure that you go through it and you follow it and you understand what exactly you're doing. So now, what is a mapping? So framework mapping, this is various regulatory frameworks and standards that are global. And what it does is it maps against those. So if you consider the high trust we talked about earlier, or COBIT, or any of these other frameworks that are out there, the big five. So what's going to happen is you're going to say, well, cybersecurity framework, you do A, B, and C. Well, A, B, and C will map, which will match up pretty well with B, F, and G on the high trust. Or it may work on A, B, and F on COBIT, right? So the point of it is that it's going to map. It's going to, how do they all tie together? Now, you'd be nice to say, if I do one, it covers them all. The problem is each of them have different needs. So if you did that, it would be monstrously huge and it would be hard to maintain. So again, you have to decide how you want to handle that. Now, others have cybersecurity as a category. We talked about regulations, and they're designed specifically for cybersecurity. Some frameworks are, like cybersecurity, the CSSP, Cybersecurity Framework. But others are using it as a category, and we talked about high trust as an example. Cybersecurity is just a piece of it, but it's an aspect. Same with COBIT and so forth. Now, they cover various items based on the location and the industry, and that really depends upon the situation where you're at. So you got one of them is called an information security management system, or you've got another one's framework for policies and procedures, or it includes legal and physical and technical controls. Okay, all of these different things that are in place will vary from location and will vary in industry. Now, so as an example, from a framework mapping standpoint, you have ISO 27001:2013. Okay, so then you have NIST 853. Then you have AICPA, which is based around CPAs. There's SOC, okay, for cybersecurity. You have HIPAA. You have Chinese cyber law. All of these together will map to different things. I've looked at the Chinese cyber law in depth, and there are pieces of that fit in very, very well with 853. Then 853 will fit in good with the cybersecurity framework. It's pretty close on that. 27001 is a lot more in depth, and because of it's a certification, it's really more of a challenge. However, if you were to go and say, you know what, there's no requirement that says I have to do ISO 27001. They're recommending that I do ISO 27001. But you say, you know what, I've been working on 853, NIST 853's security mapping forever, right? We just moved to 27001. Well, if you do that and you try to map those together, you're going to be 80 to 90% there. So it's just something you need to consider as it relates to the different pieces around the frameworks. But again, they all have a different spin on it, but identity is identity. And you just have to find out how deep into the identity and access management you have to go. So with the cybersecurity framework, there's the ID-AM-I. Okay, so what this is it's in the identity aspect, okay, and it's around physical devices and systems within the organization are inventoried. Now, that's what it states. So that's what this piece of the cybersecurity framework states, ID-AM-1 or -I. HIPAA Security Rule 45 CFR, okay, talks about the fact that you have to have a privacy aspects around individual identifiable health information. Okay, now that will happen also in the cybersecurity framework, but it won't be specifically to that wording. There's also a security rule, which is the security standards for protection of electronic protected health information. Okay, so the same things that are in there will match up with the ID-AM-I or 1, whatever that is. And the point of that is that there are going to be pieces of it that will coalesce or connect together. So that would be the security rules or the privacy rules would all tie into the ID-AM-1. So also in the ID-AM-1, you have we talked about that briefly. There's AICPA, which is Trust Services Criteria, which basically is the SOC for cybersecurity. And you're probably going, what the heck is that? Well, these CPAs, what is a CPA? Accounting, right? It's accountant, right? I can't think of what the CPA stands for, but it's CPAs. And so bottom line is you have the things that are decided in there. And one example is an entity identifies the risk of achievement of its objectives across the entity and analyzes risk as a basis for determining how risks should be managed. They use risks a lot in there, and they use identity a lot in there. However, identity ties into the IDAM-1, and so therefore they use that as a way to map against it. If you're assessing the criticality of those information systems or identifying threats, all of that is tied into the cybersecurity framework as well. Now, it isn't worded the same. They're very differently worded, but you have to understand that there are mapping products out there that will map you to what exactly the cybersecurity framework maps to as it relates to the AICPA Trust Services Criteria, or SOC for cybersecurity. All right, so here's some of the references that we put together for this part 2 of understanding cybersecurity frameworks. It's IT governance, the NIST cybersecurity framework, Calipix security, Tenables trends in security framework and adoption surveys, PCI security standards, and interactive application security testing. All right, hope you like what you saw, and we'll just get back to this, and you'll have some more. We'll catch you on the flip side. See you next week. Thank you. Bye. Thanks so much for joining me today on my podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave a review on iTunes. I would greatly appreciate any and all feedback. Also, check out my videos that are on YouTube. Just search for Shon, that's S-H-O-N, Gerber, and you'll find a plethora of content to help secure your business. Lastly, head to Reduce Cyber Risk and look for the free stuff, lots of free stuff. And it's only available for our email subscribers. It's growing each and every day. Thanks again for listening. See ya!